So what I really want to show you on this slide is partly how viruses work, and I'm really grateful for our previous speaker, Dr. Sanaban, who really illustrated this clearly. But what viruses do, they enter into cells and they cause havoc. It's a bit like a burglar coming into your home and causing destruction. The role of antibodies, and they're just one part of our immune system, they actually block the burglar from coming into your home. They will suffocate the virus and prevent the virus from causing destruction. I'm going to come back to that because that's really important, how viruses actually, what they do is they use the host machinery. They get inside your cells and make more virus particles. But these soluble proteins, antibodies, which we can all make against an infection, is really important. But the challenge, and this is the next slide, please, is how quickly we make these responses to viruses. Because the problem is viruses grow very quickly. And this is what we know about how the immune system works. And hopefully you can all see this. So when you first get a primary infection, the key thing that happens is viral load. The amount of viruses that's produced by the body increases. It's only subsequently do you start making an appropriate immune response, which is why we often get sick before we get better. So if you equate that to a situation whereby at that viral load, you've got a high viral load, you can transmit the disease, and you've also got an increase in severity, increasing illness. And I'm talking of virus in general. What happens is either upon multiple repeats of infection or through vaccination, and we know the importance that vaccines do. What vaccines will do is, and this is seen in this again in that slide, is the vaccine load is much reduced. It doesn't mean you can't get infected, and I think this is a point where we're in this discussion, does making COVID simple. Those that are vaccinated will still get COVID, but hopefully you should see from this slide the vaccine load is significantly reduced. What this means is the viral load is reduced, transmission is reduced, and disease severity is reduced. And we all know this with the current situation. Next slide, please. Specifically talking about COVID, one of the things that's immersed and folks talk around sort of natural immunity. It's really important to get the wording right. It's not natural immunity. Basically, it's immunity that you acquire either through natural infection or through vaccination. The immune system doesn't really make an immune response that differs between the two, but there are some differences. The immune system really is designed to make antibodies, to make cells, to destroy whatever is foreign. Doesn't care what it is, it will destroy it. I'll give you a perfect example of this. It's a bit like, when folks are ill and we need a kidney transplant for various reasons. Even though the body knows the kidney is important, your immune system takes a kidney from someone else. The immune system says, this is foreign and I've got to get rid of it. So that's what we have. It's called a natural acquired immunity. We acquire that. But there are some clear differences between being naturally infected with a virus such as COVID or being vaccination. This is the information here, but in the interest of time, I won't go into it, and we can maybe do that with the Q&A. But suffice to say, clearly being naturally infected, yes, you will generate immunity. The evidence suggests you will develop immunity, but the immunity is somewhat greater with vaccination. But moreover, there's a greater risk, and I'll come on to risk, of getting disease with a naturally infected virus. And I've got some data that I can share with you. Let's look at COVID vaccine, because that's what we're here to discuss. Next slide, please. And folks, and some of the questions you've asked about ingredients, this is the information about the ingredients. Often folks talk about how many people are involved in the trials. These are the numbers. As you can see, several thousand folks were involved in these clinical trials, more so than any other drug that we've consumed, okay? And in terms of the diversity of people that were involved in the clinical trials, that's the information there you can see. let's talk about side effects, because I know this is an area of real importance, because with all medicines, you do get side effects. There are some of them there. And I got another slide subsequently that will cover this in further details. But I just want to come back, next slide, please, to how the vaccine works. Because again, some folks talk about messenger RNA or DNA. It's not a natural vaccine, etc. But in the next slide, what I really want to highlight is how does a vaccine, more importantly, how does a virus infect a cell? Because what a virus does, and COVID is a perfect example, because viruses can't replicate outside the host. Viruses only have two types. They're either what we call a DNA virus or an RNA virus. So basically, the virus has got a shell, and inside the shell is either RNA or DNA. For COVID, it's called an RNA virus. So what it does, it inserts the RNA into the cell and then fools the cell into making more of its protein. And in many ways, this vaccine is mimicking exactly how COVID actually infects the cell. So it's really important. Now we talk about this technology has been around for over 20 plus years, and vaccine designs have been all trying to design themselves. There have been subunit vaccines, inactivated vaccines, or what we call attenuated. That means it's a slightly lesser version, but it's all different types of vaccines, and vaccine design is such that they've been trying to make a vaccine that can mimic an immune response to the natural infection. But the key thing, it doesn't cause disease. Next slide, please, because this is really important when we talk about the side effects. Because yes, indeed, apart from the sore arm, etc., there's quite clear evidence of adverse effects. And it's important that this is acknowledged. But what's really interesting about the side effects is that when you compare it to COVID itself, is much less reduced. And I'm all here to make folks make sure they make an informed decision with the correct knowledge. So here's one example of the numbers of blood clotting. With COVID, if you get the vaccine, there's a 0.0004% chance of getting a blood clot. Interestingly, if you smoke, it's 0.18%. And in fact, with the control pill is 0.12%. Whereas with COVID, it's a 16.5% likely of getting blood clot. Now, let me just move on finally, and my colleague spoke about mutations, and mutations occur all the time. So can I go to the next slide? And this just gives you an idea of oh yes, I wanted to put this slide in because something which is really important is about pregnancy, which we may cover later. But there's loads of information now to suggest that vaccination is really important. At the time, of all the clinical trials, there really was no evidence. So giving it vaccine to pregnant women was not something that was being discussed. I've got some link, and I want to mention my dear colleague, Dr. Vicky Mayo, who's been publishing all the data around COVID-19 and vaccination and pregnancy. The evidence now suggests that if you get COVID during pregnancy, particularly the last trimester, significant risk to you and your baby. So there's the information on this slide. Next slide, please, because I'm coming towards the end because I know other folks need to speak. Next slide, please. I just want to show you how the immune system and why we need, boosters, because our antibodies are really specific. It's like a lock and key. So when the virus change, which viruses change all the time, your antibody can't recognize it. So next slide, please. And that's why, we need a boost. And it's not just something unique to COVID, but I'm sure we're all familiar with, tetanus and flu jab. So again, thank you very much for giving me the time to talk to you today. And I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And thank you very much.